Is the mic on now? Ah. Okay. I think we're going to give this just a few more minutes. Everybody can hear me okay? Just a few. I think there's some people coming in at the back. Welcome. Happy International Women's Day. Woohoo. Before we start, I will put my reading glasses on and would like to acknowledge, do a land acknowledgement. The Field Museum resides on the ancestral homelands of the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. The area was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other Native tribes. Illinois is currently home to more than 100,000 tribal members. The museum recognizes and is grateful for the original peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. The land we walk was and remains Native land. So welcome. Thank you all for being here today for another event for celebrating Women's History Month. Thank you all out there on Zoom land for joining us today. This will be recorded, so there will be an opportunity for those of you who are here today or know other colleagues that would be interested in hearing from Dr. Carina Hoorn to be able to share that recording. There will be other events. I want to thank Jingmei O'Connor for launching us the month off with a fabulous seminar last week. We have other Women's History Month events coming up, so please check out the webpage. We also have our very own Dr. Maria Valdez, who will be here next week. So thank you for participating. Thank you for being here, and please help us to celebrate this month and join us. I was giving you a shout out, Jingmei. Thank you for kicking us off last week. It was so fabulous. Okay, let's see. Today I have the honor and privilege to have Dr. Carina Hoorn here at the Field Museum as our keynote speaker for Women's History Month. Dr. Carina Hoorn is a geologist, palynologist, paleoecologist, and an associate professor at the Institute for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Dynamics at the University of Amsterdam. She obtained her master's in 1988 and her PhD in 1994 at the University of Amsterdam, and in 2003 obtained a master's in science communication at Imperial College in London. Her research focuses on the Neogene history of Amazonia with the aim to broaden our knowledge on how landscape and vegetation evolved in this region during tectonic and climate change. She also does work on the Paleogene plant history of Central Asia and researching how plant composition changed following climate change. Carina's scientific contributions include over 100 journal articles, several books, and science communication pieces. She was recently honored with 2 national awards in the Netherlands, Dutch Excellency in Earth Sciences, which is the highest honor. She is only the second woman in over 50 years of this award. So congratulations. And also a prestigious research prize from the Royal Dutch Society for Sciences. We're so thankful to have you here today. Please help me to welcome Dr. Carina Hoorn to the podium.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Leslie, for inviting me. Thank you to the Women's Board for Science at the Field Museum and also the Women's Board at large. I'm very grateful. It's a total thrill to be here at this prestigious institution and be able to talk to you, and also to get to know the lovely city of Chicago. I'd never been here before. And well, today I would like to talk to you about the Amazon. And of course, the Amazon has been much in the news because of the dire situation it is in, because the increasing deforestation. But before going into that, I would like to give you an overview of the Amazon at large, about the geography, the biodiversity, the landscape, and the role that geology played in shaping this, this context. And then go into the deep history, because what we think is that the current processes of deforestation and degradation are far exceeding the normal natural processes that have shaped the region, even though it has been a very dynamic region over the past millions of years. So the content is laid out here. I will also explore with you, can we save the Amazon, and highlight the work of the science panel for the Amazon that I've had the honor to be part of. Since this is Women's Month, I will also reflect on request of Leslie and the, the Women in Science on what my path was into science and into the research in the Amazon, what got me here, and also who are the people that inspired me, both men and women, I should say. So why the Amazon? Well, the highest species richness of the world is actually observed across the Andes and Amazon system. And here I show you the map that, that we used for a paper in Nature Geoscience to reflect on diversity in mountains. And we show here the vertebrate species richness, but also in recent years, Peter Raven and colleagues have made a comparison between the different tropical regions, and by far the neotropics exceed species richness on all fronts, not just the vertebrate, but also in plants and many other organisms, which I'm sure is familiar to you. And then the biodiversity in the Amazon, well, the Amazon is home to 10% of all species that have been described on actually relatively small part of Earth's surface. And so how did this species richness come about? What can we say about its origins? Of course, there is biological processes, but today I would like to focus on the geological processes that have played a role in this history, in this very dynamic history. And I'm sure many of you know exactly what the Amazon looks like, but I would like to just reflect on the main units that are so important for understanding the geological history and the making of the Amazon. So I can here point at the main players, which is on one side the Andes in the west, but of course on the other side in the east it's the Amazon Craton. And the Amazon Craton hosts the oldest rocks ranging from 3 to 1 billion years, and in general are nutrient poor surfaces but also stable terrains. And then we have the Andes, which is of course dominated by metamorphic rocks, relatively young rocks, volcanism, mountain building in the past 100 million years, and overall they produce sediments that are nutrient rich and also surfaces that are rich. So these units really drive the topography, the soil types that we find in the Amazon, the biodiversity, but also the hydrology. A little bit about the geodiversity, just to give you an impression of what it looks like. So we see here on the right, we see the Table Mountains in the western part of the Amazon, which is actually also one of the threatened environments now, the Chiribiquete region. And here we see the Angel Falls, which are the Tepuyes, and here the floodplains of the Amazon. It's a very diverse landscape that is entrenched between Andes and Atlantic. And of course, that plays a role in this diversity division. So the dichotomy of the Amazon landscape is very visual in the river landscape. So here we see the Rio Negro, the Rio Negro, and we see the meeting of the waters at Manaus with the whitewater rivers from the Andes. So this nutrient rich versus nutrient poor is already visible in the hydrology. And then we see, when we look at the water composition, as already described by Scioli decades ago, these rivers, the drainages are dominated by these units. So we, as you saw in the previous picture, the white water on one side generated in the Andes, which is high productivity and rich biomass. And then the Amazon rivers that are on one side born on the crystalline rocks of the Craton, but also on the sandy surfaces and humic forest-rich areas. So we have the clear waters and the black waters, just like the Rio Negro that we saw. So again, it's a landscape that is, the geological units are defining the water system, the water composition. And of course, this also filters through to the soils. And we see this gradient, really, this abiotic gradient from west to east, which maybe is familiar to you from the maps that you've been working with. And so we see that we have this mosaic of soils. This is work by Beto Quesada from 2010 and 11, this inventory of soils. And so we see that in the west, we have this nutrient-rich soils, clay soils dominantly, and then the feral soils more in the eastern part, together with a whole mosaic, and also a phosphorus gradient, which determines the nutrient richment. And this translates into different types of forest, such as in the west, we have the young bedrock, a forest that is fast growing. And in the east, we have the old bedrock, nutrient poor, with a much slower growing forest, and in general, less diversity, which is shown in this map. This is a map that was produced originally by Hans ter Steeg. It was also used in 2010 in a review work, where we see this difference between the diversity, the alpha diversity of the trees. You see much more richness in the west than compared with the east. And as I was saying, in the river landscape, we have this gradient as well, and that also translates into different species richness in the rivers. Apologies. Far closer to the Andes, there is much higher species richness compared to the eastern part of the drainage basin, and this was also shown in these papers that are highlighted below. So this is an important aspect of the Amazon, is that the geology has played a role in the present context. We have an inherited landscape that determines where you find species richness. And so to understand how this was formed, I would like to take you into the past and look at the processes over the billions of years. And I will use the billions of years as an introduction, but my work has very much focused on the past 20 million years, which is actually a lot has happened in that period. So these are maps focusing on the composition of the craton, which is actually, when we walk through the museum and you go through the history of life, you have these beautiful moving maps illustrating how the continents have taken shape and how different Earth's geography looked over the many millions of years. And so the craton was our assemblages of old tectonic plates that assembled well, way beyond 500 million years. I said already 3 to 1 billion years. And so they have the Amazon has a very long history that is unknown to us. There was no life to speak of in those times. But of course, when we move on and we get to the split of Pangaea and the split in particular of Gondwana, where Africa and South America split up, we get the South American island continent for about 40 million years. That is when where we're going to step into the history again. So which processes played a role? So we have on one side this craton that has this very long history. And then we have also the uplift of the Andes. And the Andes is a relatively young feature of course, the Pacific tectonic plate diving under the island continent. And then due to progressive changes in the plate tectonics in the Pacific side, this also influences the formation of the Andes Mountains, and more about that later, but this is a sort of archaic mountain system 66 million years ago. And here we have another phenomenon that in geology is called the dynamic topography, which is an extra pull caused by the interaction of plate and mantle, where you get an extra drawing down of the surface. So typically where you have mountains building, you get basin formation, space where sediment can accumulate, but we get an extra pull due to this process of dynamic topography. And then we have also the process of climate change, global climate change, which of course you're all familiar with especially because of the human impact on global climate. But actually, climate has changed over the million years. We have moved from a greenhouse world, from Cretaceous until well into the Paleogene. Say 50 million years ago, we still had greenhouse conditions, but from then on, especially at the 34 million years when Antarctica is isolated and we get the circumpolar current, that's when the ice house state sets in and we have global cooling. Nevertheless, in the Neogene, which is the time that I will talk most about, we still have phases of climate warming, greenhouse conditions temporarily. And I'll come back to that because it will play an important role in the rest of the story. And this is a little summary of how the Andes evolved over time. So here you see 66 million years, and over the millions of years, you see how this Andean ridge expands. This is work from Lydia and Bosman that was published in the Earth Science Reviews. And this uplift is transformative for the Amazon, because you see this big blue patch here. So basically by generating this subsidence, uplift on one side, subsidence another, there's new environments that are generated in the west of Amazonia. So we had this stable shield, but because of this basin formation, we get a wetland about 50 million years ago that basically it lasts about 10 million years, the whole growing to wetland and decline of it. And then about 10 million years ago, the uplift of the Andes has reached such stage that the configuration in the Amazon basin changes, and we get the formation of the Amazon River, which of course, again, is a transformative step in the history of the Amazon. So what can we tell about the history? So we need sediment archives, and so these sediment archives can be found from the west in the Amazon drainage basin, this area that's entrenched between Craton and Andes, which has been this downwarping. Sediments have accumulated here over the millions of years. So we find that across the basin along, for instance, river outcrops, but also thankfully due to coring by oil companies, which is not always a good thing, but for science it can be actually quite productive in the sense that we have a record to work with. And also actually far east in the Amazon Delta and deep marine sea front, that's also where sediments have accumulated. And so they form an archive for us to study. And so the past 20 million years can be reconstructed based on the outcrop and core data that have been collected by different scientists. And so what do these outcrops look like in the field? It's something like this. They're never very big. It's actually a lot of traveling is required to find outcrops. And the problem with outcrops is they give you like a snippet, a little window in time, but they don't give you a complete window. And that's where cores such as these that were drilled in the Brazilian coal exploration project many years ago, they are extremely valuable resources to study the history. They're like a history book that is kept in boxes in hangars. That's where our history is, where it's preserved. This is just a transect from Andes to Amazon mouth. And these are these basins where the sediments are deposited and, for instance, cored and outcrops along the surfaces. So that's what we work with to reconstruct the history. I want to reflect a little bit on how this went in practice. So the outcrops are very far apart in the Amazon. It's, of course, a deeply forested region. So it's very hard to get to your data. And it took many, many expeditions, often complicated, where you had to calculate what you were taking. And sometimes these calculations went wrong. So you could find yourself without food and being dependent on the kindness of the local communities. And of course, I collected the data not just on my own, but with the help of people, my very highly esteemed companion in the field, Anibal Matapi. And here are, for instance, example of trips that we did with other colleagues, Frank Wesseling, who worked on the mollusks, and also the group from Turku, Hanna Tuomisto. And part of the data had to be collected from these sample boxes that were stored in Manaus in the core repository at DMPM, the Geological Survey. And what my own expertise is palynology, so I would try to reconstruct vegetation history by looking at fossil pollen and spores. And so once they are collected in the field, so this is how the collection went. Looks very archaic, but that's how it works. Just like you have to collect your fish or your birds, we have to collect our samples in some way, and that means going centimeter by centimeter across a section and checking what lithology is valuable. And then, then they have to go into the lab being processed, and they end up in slides, and then we find a lot of debris, and amongst them, the fossil pollen of the forest that existed many millions of years ago. So that's what we then have as a tool to reconstruct the past history of the forest. So what did we find over time? And I say we because I did just part of the work that I'm talking about. It's work from many colleagues and piece by piece we have been able to build the history that I'm telling you. And of course the history is not complete. It still will need many more people to work on this. So I hope it will also be a stimulus for other people to continue this work. But one of the first surprises that I found in my work when I was back at the university analyzing these samples after it had come from the lab was that there was evidence, and I'll show you a little bit of what evidence I'm talking about, but there was evidence for coastal and shallow marine conditions. And this is actually very surprising in the middle of the Amazon, even though 20 million years is a long time ago. Overall, the area already looked quite a bit like it does now, in the sense that the Andes had been uplifting, and so it's thousands of kilometers land inwards. But there was clear evidence from the presence of mangroves and also mollusks and diverse unicellular organisms that suggested there had been coastal conditions, episodic coastal conditions. And here we're talking about an age that is between, say, 20 and 50 million years ago, particularly around this time, 17 to 50 million years ago, we had this climatic optimum, high sea level. So it was because of the high sea level that there was an opportunity for the sea to get as far as at this area here in the Western Amazon. It was high sea level, and also, of course, the generally low downwarping that was going on because of the Andean uplift. And this gave opportunity for the immigration of, for instance, the ancestor of the freshwater dolphin, but also many other fish types. And so this is the model that we had based on the occurrence based on the evidence that we found, also that other colleagues found who were working in the northern parts, suggested that this was the distribution of this marine sea arm during the Miocene. And what did we pick out in these samples that were collected? So on one side, these mollusks that are known to require mildly saline waters, very distinct pollen types that cannot be confused with anything else, which suggests the presence of mangroves. And then the foraminifera, these unicellular organisms that occurred often quite abundantly. And another interesting aspect that they showed was they lived under stress. So it was an environment that was not properly marine. It was like estuarine environment where it was mixed fresh water to mildly saline. That's the conditions we think existed. We also learned from all this sampling and data collecting that there were distinct fluvial conditions in the earlier part of the Miocene, around 20 to 60 million years ago, and that the forest was pretty diverse. Actually, we think more diverse than at present, based on the pollen composition. And we also know that there were Mauritia, palm swamps were very common. And again, well, we found about the mangrove presence. And so that is a reconstruction, and this is a sort of reconstruction of the forest at the time, where you had these phases of dense forest and alternations with the mangroves. And then we get to the situation where the geological configuration had changed to such a degree that the large part of the Amazon, and this can be found, sediments of this time can be found in Ecuador, in Peru, in Brazil, in Colombia. So it is really a period that affected all these Amazonian countries in the West, where we had this extensive wetland. And we recognize that in the field by clay and lignite sequences that we now know were controlled also by astronomical cyclicities of about 40,000 years each. So we had these continuous cyclicity that dominated the wetland, and so where conditions waxed and waned. And so we had the shallow lakes that were inhabited by a multitude of mollusks, very, very diverse, was described by Frank Wesseling from Naturalis in the Netherlands, and also a multitude of ostracods, and they really diversed a lot. And at the same time, there was also a high abundance of different fish, of reptiles, very diverse reptile fauna. And so that is the evidence that we find in the different Amazon countries for this time. So this was a very unique environment that, as I will later illustrate, also still has effect on the biogeography as we see it today. And this is an image just to illustrate what an impact this generation of this new environment had, for instance, on the mollusk fauna. They're beautifully preserved and diversified along with the ostracods, as I said. And basically, when these wetland conditions terminate, somewhere around 11 to 10 million years ago, and it transitions again to a fluvial system, then this whole fauna that had originated also is decimated. So it was a basically extinction event that occurred at the disappearance of this wetland. The shells of these mollusks also tell us about the water composition. So the isotope analysis gives us clues about the different water sources, which at the time were sourced in the Andes, just like the sediments that was brought in, but also part in the Craton in the eastern part. So it was a mixed composition of the water. I already highlighted the reptiles were extremely diverse, and this is work from Rodolfo Salas Gismondi from University in Lima, Cayetano University. And so he showed that these, of course, I just showed you all these mollusks. Well, he reconstructed based on the dentition of the reptiles, that these reptiles were feeding on the mollusk. Of course, this was food readily available. And so they fed on mollusks, but also other organisms. And that many of these taxa, the reptiles, went extinct. So the reptile fauna was much more diverse than at present. And then when we transitioned to the Amazon fluvial system, basically only generalist tribes. So here's a illustration of the mollusk-eating, mollusk-consuming reptiles, but he also found specimens, sloths that had been clearly had a fossil of the sloths that clearly had bite marks from Purosaurus. And the boss in this trophic system was definitely the Purosaurus that was about 50 meters long. There were other large forms such as the turtle Stupendamis, which is also larger than human size. So there are some very large forms. So it's fascinating research that they're doing in Peru on the organisms that thrived in the system. I already highlighted that this marine pathway, this marine incursion, allowed, well, it allowed the freshwater, the ancestor of the freshwater dolphin, but it also allowed multiple types of fish to immigrate. And also, it must be said, there was also opportunity earlier on in the Eocene. So some of them may have even immigrated earlier, but definitely during the time of the Peibas system, this Miocene system, there was opportunity for several groups of fish. And here I'm highlighting the stingrays, the Potomatrichon. Oh, I'm not very good at saying the name of this, Potomatrichon. And they are, in terms of fossils, also very abundant. They have not been widely studied yet. There's only very sparse studies about fish that have immigrated. And so here are some of the teeth and also the otoliths that are found. But when you explore the outcrops in the Amazon, you see actually lots and lots of fish fragments, the scraping part that they feed with. And this was just like from a few small samples. So there's a lot of scope for research on the fish. And Fontanelle et al. Not so long ago had this paper in the Journal of Biogeography where they show the phylogeny and the relation with the Peibas system and how this group diversified in this system. So they were definitely very common there. So in 2010, we assembled a book and we had the joy of having an illustrator, Orlando Grigio, who, based on the information provided by the paleontologists and palynologists, such as myself and other researchers, assembled this picture to give an idea of how we envisioned this environment. And I already said, so there was diverse forest, but of course this system, as I said, waxed and waned. So there were occasionally mangroves and the peripheral areas dominated by grasses, and this fluctuated over time. I also would like to highlight that that this system, of course, had a lot of biogeographic implications. So as you already heard, there was this opportunity for species to colonize and to thrive. So it was a cradle of speciation for the aquatic and semi-aquatic taxa. They could establish, disperse in this system. But it wasn't paradise for everybody because, of course, this was also a barrier for land organisms such as the mammals. The monkeys weren't, they were definitely hampered by this system. And so also were elements that are typical for the forest. So they could not establish, of course, in this very large area. And also, so it's a cradle on one side, it's a barrier on one side, but also, of course, it's a permeable system that allowed some organisms to thrive in these transitional conditions. And also the surface that this has left in the Western Amazon, of course, is this nutrient-rich surface that is now very densely and populated by diverse flora and fauna. So also the surface that is left is of high importance. So it's two-folded. On one side, the historical component, and on the other side, the physical component of the surfaces of the Peibas formation. Well, this system, of course, disappears, and that happens around the time that the Amazon River becomes a transcontinental river. And that's all related to the uplift of the Andes that has been progressing further over time. And so by about 10 million years, there's a shift in the balance of the sedimentary system in the West, and the proto-Amazon that existed on one side in the western part, and the proto-Amazon that existed in the eastern part connected, and we get the establishment of the Amazon River. Of course, this is a totally different system than the wetland. So the taxa that thrived in the wetland are decimated, but at the same time, this creates new vicariants in the system. So we have the division based on the river, but we also this sediment that is transported to the coastal region, which has a huge influence on the coastal region. And we had the opportunity, thanks to the collaboration with Petrobras, to work on a cored drilled section in the Amazon fen, in the deep marine area in front of the Amazon mouth. And that showed us that, that about 9 to 10 million years ago, there was this connection with the Andes, because we see sediment of Andean origin arriving at that time. And we also see an increase in productivity of the of algae along the coast. And so this is a quite clearly defined on one side by the sediment composition, on the other side biologically by the change in dinoflagellates. And this is at the time that we are entering the global cooling, the transition towards what will be the ice ages. So we leave the climatic optimum of the middle Miocene, we're going into lowering sea level, the river that is incising, no further connections or very sparse marine connections. So we're entering sort of the run up to the present. From the studies that colleagues have done in central Amazon, we also see that there is more open forest. Of course, we have this wetland has been evacuated. So there's a lot, there's about 1 million square kilometers of land to be filled. And so what we see from the fossil record at the moment looks like it's much more an open forest. So quite different from the present. Yeah, just to highlight a little bit more this arrival of the Amazon. That of course is, compost in the ocean. It also affects completely the Guyana coast by this transport of sediments and also the freshwater plume. So we are not studying the biotic system except for the dinoflagellates that we looked at, but it's clear that this must have had a major impact on the fauna along the Atlantic. So to sum up this part, this is a sort of recompilation that we made for the 2010 paper, where we evaluated the history of the Amazon through time. So here we're looking at the fossils and what they tell us. And we see from, this is summarizing the information from Carlos Jaramillo on northern part of South America, where we know there was a very high species richness in the forest there and then. And here we are in this phase of the Peibas, where we see this dominance of mollusks and crocodilians, which then subsequently dwindles, and then we get into the more towards the modern conditions with the Amazon and also the connection between the Americas. So the great American biotic interchange is also happening. So there's an increase in mammals because of that. Then we summarized the phylogenies. This is work by Alexander Antonelli for the same paper, where we look at the different lineages that are Amazonian or Andean, and we see from that of course the Amazonian lineages go far back in time, and the alpine ones are much younger. In a more recent effort to evaluate what the meaning was of the geological history for the plants, Fabienne Condamine has made has reconstructed the lineages of a selection of Amazonian taxa. And if you remember, I was saying we have this large 1 million square kilometers of land that needs to be filled. So it looks like that at this time of the evacuation of the Peibas and the formation of this new land, we have definitely a diversification of selected taxa going on. These are time-calibrated taxa of typical Amazonian clade. So it gives an indication that there was a big transition happening in the late Miocene towards the present conditions. So that's how far my story goes in terms of the science. And I would like to say it doesn't end there. And of course, science never ends because there's always more to be researched, especially in our case, this transition from the late Miocene towards the present. So when we leave the Peiba system to the present, how is the Amazon populated? What is happening? That is something we really would like to know, and hopefully also of the farther the history further back in time. And we hope this is made possible by the Trans-Amazon drilling program. This has been in the pipeline for many years, but of course, as you all know, COVID happened. Also, this was affecting the Trans-Amazon drilling project. So there is 2 wells projected to provide new, fresh archives of Amazon history. And this is led by Paul Baker and Charlene Fritz. And so the drilling should be happening in April. So this is really exciting for us. So I have a little bit more to say, of course. I hope it will all fit in the time that I'm given. And as I said, we started with discussing the human impact and the threats on the Amazon. And especially in the last years, the news has been very bad about increasing rates of deforestation, and especially in the southwestern part of the Amazon, has been deforestation has been very, very intense. So basically that sums up to already 70% of the original forest has been cleared, and much more has been, or another large amount has already been replaced by agricultural land use. So in a paper that James Albert has put together recently, which appeared in Science, which is also derived from the work of the Science Panel for the Amazon, we evaluate the impact, the human impact, and the frightening thing is that this exceeds by very much, by hundreds to 1,000 times, the impact of the processes that I've been just talking about, which are natural processes that allow flora and fauna to transition into a new state. And so that is, of course, very worrying. Can we save the Amazon? Well, there has been, of course, many people are concerned. And so in 2019, the Science Panel for the Amazon has been initiated, which is an initiative from the Sustainable Development Network, which is based in New York. And a large team of scientists has been gathered for this, about 240 members at the moment from 20 different countries. Carlos Nobre is the leader of this project, of the science effort. And this, all this concern that exists, well, this panel is addressing that by making a scientific, economic, and moral case for the conservation, and to address the widespread deforestation, forest degradation, and wildfires that have intensified in the last years. And so what the panel has been doing is to assess the scientific condition, basically provide a scientific basis in the first part of this document, and then also summarize the anthropogenic changes in the Amazon and discuss solutions. And so through this assessment report, there is a number of policy briefs that have been published, which are really important calls for what is needed to prevent the Amazon reaching a tipping point where it would seriously have no way back to restoration. And also it would dramatically affect not only the regional climate, which has already been affected, but also the global climate. And so the call is for achieving zero deforestation by 2030, avoid further forest degradation, restore the forest in protected areas, and perform sustainable restoration. And of course, also this requires many people to be involved, and in the first place of all, to engage with the local communities who have been able to live there in a sustainable way for many years, but also much more monitoring. And so I think maybe with the regime change in Brazil, there is much more hope for this to be happening. So that's where that part of the story ends. And also would like to a little bit reflect, if I still have time for that. I think there's a few minutes. yeah, celebrate the people that inspired me and also celebrate some of the women in Amazon science. How did I get here? Well, it's a bit silly, but I started in this, well, my life started in the 60s, and yeah, sources of inspiration were actually, for me, were my books. And we had a book on, yeah, on the trades with the East Indies, and that was a shipwreck where, yeah, the people who are shipwrecked have to find their way through the tropical forest of Southeast Asia. And so this was very fascinating to me as a little kid to read this. And so that was maybe one of the first things that inspired me. And also the fact that I spent a lot of time living in Spain. And whilst in Spain, well, we had a very important person on the Spanish TV, and he was called Felix Rodriguez de la Fuente. I don't know if anybody has lived in Spain or has a history in Spain, but he was a sort of David Attenborough, who's very famous in the UK, who makes all these nature films. So he made the nature films in Spain about the Spanish, the Peninsula Iberica, all the flora and fauna across the Iberian Peninsula. And so he was, I think, for many people, an inspiration for people who lived at that time and were watching TV. He was the, yeah, our connection to nature in Spain. And so he was definitely, for me, one of the people who made me feel attracted to understand nature. And then in the 70s, I was living more permanently in Spain. And I was living, well, in the Bete Cordillera, surrounded by mountains. So that does something to your attraction to geology. And also we had some wonderful teachers at school. We had a very nice biology teacher and a very nice geology teacher. And the geology teacher was only there 1 year. And then we had no more geology, but I happened to be a student in that year. So that also, yeah, made, yeah, was a call to geology. And then living in Spain, of course, we had to read South American literature, or we didn't have to, but that's what we like to do. And we also had the opportunity to look at the Investigación y Ciencias, which was the magazine now here, well, of course, here known as the Scientific American. So for me, those were all sources of inspiration to get to do what I have been doing throughout my life. And then when in the 80s, I started studying geology and palynology, I got acquainted with Professor van der Hamme. He is a very charismatic figure and is well known in Colombia for the projects that he initiated in along the Andes, making inventories of understanding, combining geology with the biology and relating uplift of the Andes with the flora and fauna along the elevational gradient. And he was a very inspiring teacher. He was a big personality, could tell beautifully about his research. And I think that's the power of teachers, is to tell about research and making other people to want it as well. And so that's definitely why I got into palynology. Before I met him, I thought, oh, palynology must be very boring, just sitting at the microscope all the time. But when I heard him talk, I thought, oh no, this is the best thing you can do. So that's what I ended up doing. And then, well, under his supervision, I went to the Amazon, did a lot of stuff there that I've just spoken about. But whilst I was doing that work, I was living in Colombia, and I was, well, I found a family there. I was very happy to have a Colombian family who basically took me as a lost child there, and who were, yeah, very much supporting my work and also gave me a great time the times that I would be in Bogota, because we was, of course, working between Leticia and the Cacta River and so on. So I would be at the house of Amelia Monroy, and she was a very strong character as well, who had her own business and was a very inspiring figure in that sense. And then when I got back to the Netherlands, then I met Maria Antonieta Lorente, who is a very important Venezuelan scientist who nowadays lives in the US. Part of the Venezuelan diaspora, a pioneer in neogene research, palynology, who was my mentor when I was starting my PhD. And she was always had drive and always found everything interesting and gave a lot of push. So it was really nice to have her. And then there was Maria Lucia Apsi from IMPA, who was my roommate when I was sitting at the microscope, and she knew everything about the palynology of the Quaternary of Brazil. So she was a very important, not a source of knowledge only, but also very, very, very beautiful person to be around. So those are some of my important people. Then I was out of science for a long time and more sort of itinerant. I was traveling after my PhD. I had kids. Well, I got married, had kids, and traveled around with my husband, who had an international job. So we lived in Turkey, in Oman, in Libya, in UK, in the far north of the Netherlands. And but during that time, I always felt that because of all this previous inspiration, I felt I had a mission still to fulfill. So I never left the topic I loved so much, which was the Amazon. I never really left it. So it was always traveling with me and also expanded into new areas, just depending on where we were. And whilst I was in Oman, I basically was at the a sort of camp for oil people who are in the oil exploration. So it was very different from the context I came from. But there I met another fantastic figure, that was Dr. Shahina Ghazanfar. And she is a botanist and specialist in flora of the Middle East. She was doing a book at the time, and so I got inspired by her work on that one thing, definitely, and also by her charisma and her desire to discover. And she got me into the university at Oman, at the Sultan Qaboos University, where I had the opportunity to work with the Muslim students, and I love all I learned from them, and it was a great time. And she was very, very important at that time. And then finally got to Kew Gardens much later, where I was at the time that Peter Crane was director, and who I think you know well, or some of you may know. And and I got research associate there. And then the final stretch was, during this time. And then I came back to the Netherlands, and I sort of got the opportunity to get back to the University of Amsterdam as a guest researcher. And finally, I got employed there as an associate professor in 2018. So it was like clawing my path back into science. So it has not been a straight road. And I think that's why I was asked to speak about this, just to give an idea, like you can go into science, your journey through science can be very different, and it can include children and doing different things. But if you are motivated, it will still bring you back to where you started, I think. So I won't take you too long, so we'll skip that. And because I have the opportunity, I also would like to celebrate other women in science. And there are some fabulous women. This is just a selection of the people that I would like to give a shout out. I'm not going to name them all, but they're doing all fabulous work. And I think they should be an icon for also those who want to do science, and they are representing also those that are not in this photo. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope it hasn't been too boring because it's quite long, but thank you very much for listening to me.
I think we have a few minutes for those who want to stay and ask a couple of questions. And I think there's a mic back here, maybe. Is that right? But in the meantime, if someone would like to ask, is that okay for a few more questions? Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Then I'd be happy to come by with the mic.
Thank you. Great talk, Carina. I would like to go back to the very beginning, because you said something that actually was new to me. So before the PEBA system, you said that the diversity of plants, I imagine, was even higher than it is today, right? And this was before we have the Andes, all this weathering, all the PEBA system. So what was driving this diversity? So like, because all of the drivers that I thought were the drivers of this super high diversity today were not there yet. And what is the explanation for the super high diversity of plants before?
Well, I think also that part of the early Miocene is still part of the climatic optimum. So I think that is part of the driver. We know from the work in the north of Colombia that the Eocene, which is super hot, and the PETM from the work of Carlos Jaramillo, and I showed that a little bit in that figure earlier on, the diversity is super high. So we tend to think of greenhouse conditions as a bad thing, but as long as humans don't interfere, it is a natural thing. And the vegetation, global vegetation, has been adapted to greenhouse conditions for millions of years. So basically the shock has been the transition to an icehouse state, or this much cooler climate, which has also driven the like the grasses and the Asteraceae to develop. So yeah, so it was I think especially the climate. Also the Andes was partially there already. So also in that time we have source Andes, mixture Andes, Craton. So it does play a role already. I would say it's like a precursor to the Peibas. Thank you.
I guess I'm next. Carina, nice talk. One thing that I've always appreciated about your work was that it's always very integrative. You tie in lots of different sources of data and perspective on things. And I think it's a huge challenge and something that's really important in studying biodiversity in a context like this, especially through time. As someone who works with this sort of stuff, I was just really interested in your perspective on the different sorts of data that you tie in together. Is there one field or a couple fields that you feel really lags behind the other ones that you work with in terms of the amount of data available and sort of integration of those data types?
Oh, yeah, I think in this context, I was mentioning that to Leslie already. I think, for instance, the study of the fossil fish, especially in the Peibas system, that should be very meaningful, and that has hardly happened. It was just like a few crumbs have been looked at. I know also bird remains are part of the fossil record in the Peibas. So I think drawing the picture of this very unique system still lacks a lot. So that would be the first thing that comes to my mind. There are certain groups that we know have a fossil record and that have not been looked at. There's a lot of, I think, also fossils so to be explored in the field. I know also in Akron, the University of Akron, they have huge amounts of fossils that they have collected, and I think a lot of that still is waiting to be described. So especially on those things, yeah. And also we always, when you look at the geological record, you like good dating. And we actually have a difficulty with really accurate dating. So we depend on the palynology, which is relative dating. And we have the zonations that are established in the coast, and we can link them, but dating should be improved. And that's also why the prospective wells can be very helpful and give us much more precise information what happened when.
Hi, Carina. Wonderful talk. You just answered my question, and I was going to ask about the drilling project, but dating is going to be one of the benefits of that. But in terms of plans, what do you test? What do you expect, or what will change from that data, from the core, at least in Peibas?
I think different people have different expectations on this core. My expectation and what I would like to put my little money on is this transition from after the Peibas. So what happens when this land is suddenly dry again and it hasn't been forested? So how is that being colonized? How is this transition from late Miocene, Pliocene to especially to the Pleistocene? Because we suspect, based on very few data really, that there is much less plant families for a while. And then we get, at the same time, from the molecular record, we see this sort of, diversification. So how to create that picture, I think for me, that is one of the big things to be answered. because that is like, how do we get to the flora of the present? And the debate on the diversity of the Amazon has been for a long time very centered on the quaternary processes. And so our mission way back in 2010 was to show that in the past there was a very diverse forest, but still the transition to this modern forest, I think that I would like to see that happening. And I'm curious to hear what you would like to see happening. Yeah.
I think we have, oh, Abigail, you have a question, and we have a question on Zoom, if you don't mind. Okay, go ahead, Abigail.
I can hear it, but I could hear it with the microphone.
Perfect. Now I'll just scream it at you. So the slide that you had clawing your way back into research was really striking to me. I imagine it's hard coming back into any work field, let alone academia, after having been gone for some time. And I wondered, you know, it had the word claw in it, like it had a very visceral, specific feeling to it of how tough it was. And I wonder if you could say something more about that more than decade-long return that you undertook at the university, and if there was anything during that time you wish you would have had to help support you.
That's a hard question. Yeah, there's many things that can happen in life, of course, that can draw you away. And when it all happens, you think, okay, well, that's just life. That's just how it is. But I think especially, and now things have changed, but I think the question in the Netherlands has been like, oh, why is there not enough women in science? Where have they gone? I mean, they all seem to study, and where are they gone? Well, they go because, yeah, you have children and you don't want to drop your children and you want to look after them, and it's difficult decisions. You may be short of money, you may need to bring money in, not this uncertainty of the postdocs. And at the same time, so that was happening. And then also at the time, not enough understanding at the universities that, yeah, you have to facilitate women to enable them to work. So I think, yeah, that's I think the time frame has changed, and there's more awareness of it now. So I know at our university, at some point they changed the rules. They had to change the rules. So there was this hierarchical situation where there was the professor and there were so many jobs that were to be filled and no more. And they, at some point, they dropped this system and said, no, we're not just going to replace somebody, because it means like everybody got stuck, like so many people coming, there's only one place. So they just allowed more jobs to be generated to facilitate this women entering into the universities. So, but it's, I would say it can be, you can, yeah, see, you can get off course from your mission because of circumstances. And it, yeah, it can, yeah, you have to sort of stick with it. Like that was my mission.
I had a quick question for you about the drilling project that, and possible connections with the science panel for the Amazon and the efforts to, you know, lead to zero deforestation. Are there opportunities to have conversations with these large drilling projects and organizations or groups to help kind of in the efforts for the Amazon and saving the Amazon?
Well, I should say that the whole drilling, basically the Trans-Amazon drilling, the ICDP, which is the International Continental Drilling, they provide like a sort of seed money. So most of the money to make this happen has been raised either by the NSF through Paul Baker and Charlene Fritz, or by Sao Paulo University, who have used their funds to make this happen. So basically it depends a lot on the individuals who are leading the project.
Right.
The ICDP itself is just like a forum that enables it, but it doesn't help much in that sense. So
I
I wouldn't
see.
expect much in terms of conversation, but the how you say that the collective of scientists that are working with the Trans Amazon, they could of course also make an impression. But in that sense, I think the Science Panel for the Amazon is the most powerful.
Right.
That is really the organization that is well structured. It follows the structure of the climate panel and the biodiversity panel, and so they have a very good structure and are efficient in the way of producing these briefs. And I think that's making a difference. That already we are seeing it's taking people are taking note. So I would
Thank
like to
you.
encourage you to either participate or support the Science Panel for the Amazon.
Yes, I think there was one question on Zoom. If Matt, do you want to read that one? And then I think we can close there. Thank you all for staying a little bit over. Thank you, Carina.
Okay. This is from Bruce Patterson. He says, did the arrival of Amerindians 10,000 to 12,000 years ago have noticeable effects on Amazonian forest landscapes, or just on the disappearance of their large-bodied animal occupants?
Well, this is more the topic of my colleague Crystal McMichael at the University of Amsterdam. Sorry. And so what I've learned from her and their work is that indeed they had an impact on the forest, and so the forest that we think is pristine is actually a very cultural forest already, but the forest has always been able to regenerate because it has not been large-scale deforestation. So there is a lot for those who study the last 10,000-20,000 years, sorry. They see that those changes from and the impact of the human colonization in the Amazon.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.